guys, this is Aaron. So one of the things we get a lot of questions about, of course, is rendering SketchUp models. Rendering doesn't actually happen in SketchUp, it happens in other software. Sometimes that software directly connects in with SketchUp. Sometimes it's a third party that a SketchUp model is exported to. So it's really hard to talk about rendering in an absolute way, like this is the way to do it. There are some general rules of thumb, though, you want to consider when you're prepping a model for rendering. Let's take a look at a few of those right now. Okay, so I have this model, this building right here that I want to export for rendering or render through extension right inside of SketchUp. There's a couple main things I would consider when I start seeing if a model is going to be ready to be rendered or not. The first one, probably the biggest one, is my face orientation. What I mean by that, of course, is every face inside of SketchUp has a front side and a back side. Renderers, generally speaking, will acknowledge and work with the front faces of a model. So what I mean by that is the material that's on there will have reflectivity, or the light will hit it and it will render that way, whereas back faces are oftentimes just basically seen as flat black potentially, or even see-through depending on the renderer. So how do you check that in SketchUp? The easiest way to do this is this button right here, Monochrome. It's also available over here under View, Face Style, Monochrome. So if I click on Monochrome, what Monochrome does is it shows me my entire model with my front and back faces to their default material. So my white pieces, all the white is the front faces. Anything that's this bluey gray color is actually a back face. So again, depending on the renderer I use, when I take this lamppost in, this top part and this part here might be invisible. I might have this section just floating right here. Or I might even see a flat black or bright white face here with no rendering on it at all. So using monochrome is a good way to be able to come in here and click into your geometry, reverse it, so that it's the proper orientation for rendering. So that's step number one, is making sure that all your faces are the correct direction. So back here I have some more pieces I'd have to figure out. My frames right here, my window, I'd have to straighten all that out before I took this out for rendering. The second thing to look at is materials. Now this is a tough one to talk about because there's different ways that different renderers work with materials. Some renderers will just take the geometry from SketchUp in, and you will be applying your own materials once you get into the rendering software. If that's the case, then pretty much do whatever you want. Leave the whole thing as one color, put just colors to hold places. Some people will go in and they will color code their model where this is wood, so it's going to be red, metal's going to be green, concrete's going to be blue, and they'll go in and they'll color code by material that way. Others will use representative materials like SketchUp default materials. Some renderers will actually allow you to place render-ready materials right inside of SketchUp. If that's the case, generally speaking, it happens one of two ways. Either it will add folders to your standard colors drop-down, where you actually have a list of their colors here, or through an extension, whatever the renderer's extension is, they'll have a tool to place their render-ready colors or materials onto your model. So that's something else to consider. And again, unfortunately, I can't say there's an absolute way to do that because it does vary depending on the renderer, which type you're going to use. The third thing you want to consider, and again, like I said, unfortunately, this is not one of those things that there's an absolute on. This is a little bit more consistent across renderers, is looking at lights. So in SketchUp, when we look at shadows and that kind of thing, we get a single light, which is a sun light source somewhere up in the sky that just casts shadows on the ground. You don't actually see it ever, but it does change the colors that show up on the model based on casting basic shadows. Some renderers will acknowledge the location of that sun and basically create a new light representing that when you render. Others will not recognize that at all, and you'll have to place all lights into your SketchUp model. So in this case, I actually have some lights. They're here on this lights tag, so I can turn that on, and it'll actually show me these pieces that will represent lights. So any place I have these downward facing can lights in this model, I went in and got a light facing down here. So when this actually renders in my renderer, it will be showing light from these pieces. I also have, with the rendering software, a sun up in the sky that's going to cast light down from above. So however it works, depending on your rendering software, you're going to want to make sure that you account for those lights if need be. Like I said, there are some cases where the software will recognize the sun, and if all you want is a daylight scene, no interior lighting, then you might be done at that point. All right, the third and final piece is all grouped together in Entourage. So when I talk about Entourage, I'm talking about that's all the things that are in the model. How I set up my model in SketchUp might be different from how I want to actually export it into a renderer. So I might have some things like, if I want to get a good shot right here viewing right into the house, I might be able to line up like this. Well, this lamppost is kind of in the way, so I maybe don't want it. So what you may want to do is delete or hide this lamppost just for the render. So same thing here, maybe I don't want this table here, I could delete that. And something else I got that's going on that's kind of weird here is I have some people. I have some entourage back here, and maybe I don't actually want these 2D people in my drawing, so I'm actually come in and delete those out before I go in and render. Same thing inside here. See, I have some people here. So that might look good for an image that I'm creating. So if when I go in and I create my image that I want for the cover of my plan set, those people are perfect. But for my render, I might not want those ghostly outlines in my render. There's a possibility that I do, which is perfectly fine. But if I'm looking for like a photorealistic render, probably cutouts of people aren't going to be perfect. The other thing to think about is things like these trees. These trees definitely set the mood for what I'm going to be seeing here. I can tell that I'm in kind of a pine, maybe a mountainy location because I got all these pine trees around it. Definitely tells me what I'm doing inside of SketchUp. But again, when I render, I might not want to see these 2D cutout looking trees. So it may be the time to swap these for high resolution renderable trees instead of my 2D face me's. 2D face me's are great, especially when I'm dealing with a big model where I have a lot of geometry, but when I actually go out to render, I might want to swap those out. That's something that can happen manually or automatically, depending on what you have set up. Some renderers will allow you to automatically swap out proxies for renderable high-res items. Others will require you to do it manually, which would mean taking this component right here and swapping it for a high-res renderable component. Once you have that all set up, those pieces, you may want to consider doing this. Rather than having your working model be changed, you may want to go to File and hit Save As and save a separate renderable version of this model. So rather than taking this, making modifications or creating scenes, rendering it, and then having going back, it's possible that I'll want to just change it once and then just move forward with it. Either way, at that point, you're pretty well ready to hop into your render. The process of rendering from there is going to be different depending on which renderer you use, but it should be pretty easy for you to take that SketchUp geometry and create a nice render like these. So there you go. Like I said, try to keep that kind of generic because which renderer you use is going to make changes to how you do some of those specific tasks. But generally speaking, those are going to be true for any rendering process you use. Did you like that? If so, go ahead and leave us a like down below. And if you haven't already, click on the subscribe button. We create a couple videos, live streams a week around here, and you'll be notified if you're subscribed to the channel. Most importantly though, please leave us a message. Most of our content is derived from people's requests in the comments down below. We like making these videos a lot. We like them even more when they're showing something you want to see. Thank you.